Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second session, the Peer Support Conference. We'll go ahead and wait a minute or so to allow folks to hop on, but in the meantime, please do jot down the emails that are on the screen so you're able to contact our team should you have any technical difficulties. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Alejandra Del Toro, and I am the Education and Community Coordinator with Empower Idaho. Empower Idaho is a program of Janus that offers educational activities, advocacy, provider trainings, amongst many more items for adults with behavioral health conditions in Idaho. Today, we are with Hillarie Hagen, a fellow Janus employee who will be presenting on advocacy at the Idaho Legislature. Quick overview with the control panel. You will see that all of the attendees are muted and the webcam option is disabled. So the way that you'll communicate with our team and with Hillarie is through the questions box. So in that questions box, you will put both your comments and questions, and we'll be monitoring it throughout and reviewing questions, have some stops throughout the presentation to address those questions, and also reserve some time at the end to answer anything else that wasn't answered throughout the presentation. This session is being recorded, so that will be available within the next couple of business days on the Empower Idaho website. And lastly, you are able to access the slides under the handouts tab in the control panel. So you are welcome to follow along and download those. The CEU eligibility is laid out in the confirmation and reminder email. So if you are seeking a CEU from this session, please do refer to that to make sure that you adhere to all of the requirements so you're able to receive that certificate. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Hillarie, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Alejandra. And hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here today to talk a little bit about advocacy at the Idaho Legislature. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. My name is Hillarie Hagen, like Alejandra said. I work for Idaho Voices for Children. I am a health policy associate. I've been working at Voices for about 5 years now, and my whole area of expertise is healthcare policy. And some of the things that we've done over the last several years is working on policies that impact kids and families in Idaho with relation to health coverage and access to care. Some of the biggest things that we've worked on is Medicaid expansion campaigns, as well as working on other healthcare policies for kids and families. So today I am going to go over just sort of what I consider a legislature 101, what everybody needs to know when they want to be involved in the legislature, a little bit about the process, how the legislative session works, how you can be involved, and then also just some key issues that we are going to be seeing in the coming legislative session around behavioral health. And like Alejandra said, I will stop periodically to see if people have questions. And so if you have questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will make sure that I have the opportunity to stop and answer those. So to start off, a little bit about the work that we do. We coordinate a statewide group called Idaho Kids Covered. It's the largest health policy advocacy group in the state. We use data, research, best practices to advocate for health policies to improve health coverage and access to care for kids and families, with an emphasis on low and moderate income families. Our network consists of advocates, lawmakers, and other organizations who are invested in these type of policies. We also work with Idahoans who have lived experiences to share their stories. So through this statewide group called Idaho Kids Covered, we track issues like uninsured rates, health trends, and help protect programs like Medicaid that serve kids to ensure they have access to the coverage that they need through the program. We produce reports, policy recommendations, conduct educational webinars, and also provide action opportunities for Idahoans like yourself to get involved to help advance some systemic changes. So let's go ahead and jump in and start talking about the Idaho Legislature. So a little bit of an introduction. Idaho has a part-time legislature that convenes every year in January and typically ends in the springtime. So usually it's by the end of March. Their goal is typically to get out by what is called sine die, which in Latin means basically to adjourn. They have typically ended in April. I would say on average, that's when they end, depending on if it's an election year or not. They sometimes like to get out early if it is an election year, but we've seen it go all the way into May. The really only thing that the legislature is tasked with doing is balancing the state budget every year. So setting state agency budgets like Department of Health and Welfare, the education budgets, those type of budgets that are paid for through our state general fund dollars, and also authorizes funding from the federal government. That is really the only thing the legislature has to really do. But in addition to that, they also take up other bills and other legislation that when they're the ones in charge of actually passing bills and laws. To balance the budget, that has to be done by June 30th. And so they typically have to have the budget set for the upcoming fiscal year. So every fiscal year is starts July 1st and runs through June 30th of the following year. So that's the fiscal year. So they have to have that budget set by the end of June. There are 35 legislative districts, each with 2 House representatives and 1 senator. So we have about 70 House representatives and 35 senators total. If you don't know your representatives, you can look them up online by finding your district. And it's pretty easy to look up, and I can even share in a moment how to access finding your legislature. So one of the things that is really interesting that has recently happened is previously the legislature always convenes in January. However, a new constitutional amendment that was on the most recent ballot in November changed the Idaho Constitution to allow the Idaho legislature to be able to call them back into what's called a special session or an extraordinary session. So that means once they convene in March or April and they're done with their business for that year, if they want to come back, they can call themselves back into session after this just recently passed. That means that what they do is they have to get a petition stating what the intent of the special session is, and have 60% of the legislature sign on saying yes, that they want to convene that special session. But they can only address legislation according to the topic on that petition. Previously, the governor was the only one that could call the legislature back into session once they convened. But with this new amendment that just passed, they can now actually call themselves back into session. So to go over a little bit about who's in charge, both chambers are controlled by the majority Republicans. Democrats are in the minority. So with the recent election, we have about 11 Democrats in the House and 6 in the Senate. Leadership positions are chosen by legislators of each party, and the ones that I have on screen right now are actually who is currently in leadership. This is going to be changing come January, and on December 1st, they're having what's called organizational sessions, where they're all coming to Boise and taking votes on who will be in leadership for the Republican Party and for the Democratic Party, in addition to choosing who is going to be the Speaker of the House, for example. So right now, the Lieutenant Governor is the presides over the Senate. So they're the ones that stands up on the Senate floor and directs the way the business runs on the Senate floor. In the House, the House representatives actually elect the person to be the Speaker on the floor who runs the floor. Currently, right now in the Senate, it is Senator Chuck Winder. He is what's called the so in the Senate Act, so there's a president pro tem, and while he doesn't preside over the Senate, he is basically the one in charge over the Senate. And then there will also be, which means he's over both the Senate Republicans and the Democrats. And then right now, Kelly Anthen, Senator Anthen, he is the leader over the Republican Party in the Senate. And then the assistant to the majority leader is Senator Abby Lee. We anticipate that will stay the same for the upcoming legislative session. On the House side, it was Speaker Scott Bedke who was presiding over the House. However, he is the new Lieutenant Governor, so he is going to, starting January, be presiding over the Senate. Right now, the majority leader in the House over the Republican Party is Mike Moyle, and he is going to be running for the Speaker position in the House. For the Democratic Party, we had previously the leader and the assistant minority leader was Michelle Stennett and Grant Burgoyne. That is going to be changing this next January as well, given that Michelle Stennett is no longer a senator. She retired. In the House, Alana Rubel and Lauren Necochea are the minority leader and the assistant minority leader. They will likely, I believe they're keeping their leadership because they are also returning. So this gives you a sense of the leadership structure within the Senate and the House, and and the different positions that are actually happening within the Senate and the House. I'm going to pause right there before we jump into legislative session basics and see if there are any questions.
Hey, Hillary, we don't have any questions as of yet.
Okay, thank you. I'll just go ahead and keep going, but if you have questions, just put them in the chat. So going into legislative session, some of the key things that we watch that are related directly to the healthcare policy world. There's what's called the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. This committee approves agency and department budgets, and it is made up, the committee is made up of members from both chambers. So we have House representatives and Senate representatives both making up this committee. It approves health and welfare budgets like Medicaid. It also approves education funding. They really work with the state agencies to review budget requests from the agencies, as well as reviewing the governor's budget recommendation, and they set the budgets. Once they set the budgets, they vote on these budget bills that then moves on and goes to the full House and full Senate. As far as the individual committees on both the House and the Senate side, there are health and welfare committees that are made up just of, so in the House, it is just House committee members. In the Senate, it's the same, just Senate committee members. And they look over legislation that is separate from funding decisions, but other types of policies that are going to impact programs like children's health coverage, Medicaid, the SNAP program, Children's Health Insurance Program, public health departments, a lot of different policies that directly relate to public health in both the House and Senate. Bills can start on either side in these committees, but those are the three main committees that from a public health policy perspective, we track very closely. So a little bit about how to track some bills and some of the process that these committees have. So committees meet on a regular basis throughout the legislative session. So House Health and Welfare and the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, also known as JFAC, they all meet almost every single day. Sometimes they skip like a Friday, but generally these committees will meet every single day because there is so much that comes through their committees. There are two types of committee hearings. One is called a print hearing, and this is basically where a sponsor or an agency comes up with a bill that they want to ask the committee to allow to be given a hearing and an opportunity for votes to be put into law. So this is the very first point. What it is they come in, the sponsor will introduce it to the committee, give an overview of this legislation that they want to have the opportunity to have a hearing on. They ask for the committee to print the legislation so that it can be given a bill number and allow testimony on it. Now, there have been times when committees don't even let a bill be printed. Sometimes they don't even like the general concept, so they will say, they'll say, no, we actually don't feel like this is worth printing and the time that it put into it. Other times they'll just say, yes, let's go ahead and print it and get more information on it. During a print hearing, they don't accept public testimony. So they usually will allow it to be printed so that more in-depth questions can be asked and for opportunities for agencies and the public to actually give testimony. So if a bill is printed, it is then given a bill hearing. So what happens is it'll be given a bill number. So like House Bill 581 is an example of a bill number. The H before the bill number means it starts in the House, and S before the bill means that it starts in the Senate. So a bill hearing means that we have this bill that has come up that they're like, the committee is like, yes, we want to hear more about it. We have questions about it. We want to hear from the public and other professionals on their input on this bill. So they will then have a hearing. And then after the hearing and after they hear public testimony, they have a few options of what they want to do with the bill. What they can do is they can take a vote on the bill. And there's a couple of different ways that they can vote. They can say, I want to vote yes on this bill and send it to the House floor, asking that it pass as written. They also can say, I want to send it to the House floor, but without a recommendation. I want to hear what my colleagues on the House floor might be interested in it. So they can choose to send it to the floor with a recommendation of it passing, or just they can send it to the House floor for a vote without recommending it pass or not pass. They can also choose to send it to the amending order, which is essentially, hey, we're going to send it up to the House floor, but we think there should be some changes. And so they'll do that and then send it to the House floor amending order. Or they can say, I don't feel like this is a good bill. I want to actually just hold it in committee, which means that they won't even vote on it, that they're just going to hold it and not allow it to even have a vote. Or they can choose to vote on it and it either passes or it doesn't pass and they can just kill the bill. So it's a little bit funny in all the different terms that they use and the process that they go through to actually get a bill out of a committee. But essentially after it makes it out of committee, then it goes through the next process, like goes to the House floor for a vote. And then after it goes through the House floor, it goes to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. Then it goes through the same exact process that it in the Senate that it did in the House. Gets a hearing, has an opportunity for a vote. Then that vote can either determine if it goes to the Senate floor for a vote. And then if it passes the Senate floor, it goes to the governor for signing, etc. It goes both ways in the House and Senate. So if a bill starts in the House, that's the process. But if it starts in the Senate, it goes through the Senate committee, Senate floor, to the House committee, then House floor, then governor. So that's kind of the pathway on both sides. So every committee has the ability to, they all are supposed to actually post their agenda for what is going to be on what they're discussing the next day. So you can actually go on the legislative website and actually look in the different committees. And so on the screen, you can see House standing committees. There's a section for Senate standing committees. And this is where you can go in and view the agenda for the next day. They're supposed to they are supposed to put up the agendas 24 hours in advance. As things start moving through the legislative session, sometimes they don't always get that 24-hour notice. They sometimes will post an agenda and add things to the agenda at the last minute, which can sometimes be a little frustrating because it really limits the ability for the public to come in and weigh in at a last minute's notice. But typically they're posted the night before. And you can look at that on the legislative website to see what those agendas are. You can also sign up for email alerts. So every time a new agenda is actually posted, it just automatically goes to your email. There's a couple of different ways to actually be involved in the legislature and to watch some of the committee hearings. So you can choose to go to the Capitol building, but Idaho is a pretty big state and not everybody has the ability to drive to Boise. So fortunately, Idaho Public Television has a way for you to view a live stream of different committees as well as the House and Senate floor. So you can go to this link right here and click on the different committees that you want to watch, and the live stream will be available. So you can watch the House and Senate floor debates, you can watch both Senate and House Health and Welfare, and JFAC committee hearings as well. So some of these committees also offer some remote testimony options. You can find that also under the House committee agenda. If you want to sign up for testimony virtually, you can do that through the website. So going next to how to really testify in committee. When a bill is given a hearing, the chairman will go through their agenda for the day and announce when that particular bill you're interested is up. What they do is they say, okay, House Bill 581 is up for consideration. The legislative sponsor will come up, give an introduction to the bill, give an overview of it. A lot of times legislators are a sponsor and are sponsoring legislation on behalf of constituents, and they get up and they're like, I'm not an expert in this bill. I was approached by my constituent, whether it's an organization or an individual who brought this up as being really important, that we need to have this legislative fix to a law, or we need this new rule or law in place. And so they'll introduce it. A lot of times they will ask to yield some of their time to maybe their constituent or the expert they've been working with on this bill, and that person will give some introduction to it. And then after the sponsor or experts have the opportunity to introduce all the pieces of the bill, then they open it up for public testimony. Typically, it depends on the bill. Some bills don't really have anybody showing up to testify because they're pretty technical, and they have, usually it's brought by an agency. Other times when you have really big bills, especially controversial bills, they tend to have a lot of people show up and want to testify. So because a lot of times they will limit testimony to about 2 or 3 minutes. And they usually go through in the order that they signed up, but sometimes depending on the committee chairman, a lot of how the chairman run their committees, it's up to the chairman. So the chairman can choose to jump around and say, I want to hear from a pro and a con on this bill. I want to hear from varying sides of the bill. And so sometimes they will jump around, or if they have a particular expert in the room there to testify that they know could provide some really valuable content and context, they'll ask them to come up first. Typically you get about 2 to 3 minutes. And then once they get through all of the testimony, then the committee will vote on that bill. Sometimes if they have a lot of people sign up for testimony can span more than a day. They have times they have to be up on the floor. So if a committee hearing is running long, they may hold the vote and try to continue testimony the next day or at a future date, which can be hard for folks as they come down to the Capitol and want to be a part of actually weighing in on different bills. But it's the unfortunate, frustrating part of actually being able to testify, especially on some of these really big issues that people are really engaged in. So a few basics of testimony, just to help you know what to prepare for when you're coming to give testimony on a particular bill. So when possible, bring a printed version of your testimony, because that will ensure that it's recorded and it's on the record accurately. They have, the secretary takes notes, but it's always best to have a printed version. Whenever you show up to give a testimony, you approach the podium, you go through your testimony, but you always address the committee through the chairman. So let's say you get through your testimony, and one of the legislators on the committee has a question for you. They will say, Chairman, I have a question. And so the chairman will ask if you're open to having a question, and you say, yes, I will, and I will answer any questions. And then when you answer, you always reference the chairman. So you say Chairman Martin and Representative Rubel, yes, I've seen blah, 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 and then whatever the answer is. So you always address the chairman first and then the legislator. Because a lot of testimony is really limited, trying to have your testimony down to 2 to 3 minutes is important if you want to have all your points actually heard. This is about 200 to 300 words typed out. A lot of times, people are concerned about being able to lobby under their certain organization. And so a lot of people even just show up and just provide education about some positives or negatives about the bill without really necessarily asking them to vote in favor of it. But committees tend to understand which way, whether or not you're in favor or not. Sometimes people will show up and just say, hey, this is, here's some things, some extra context of what you need to know before you actually vote on this bill. But ideally, they want to know how many there from the public are for the bill, why they're against, And a lot of times you can say, at the end of your testimony, I ask that you vote in favor of this bill, or I ask that you vote this bill down. I'm going to pause right there real quick and see if any questions have popped up about testimony, committees, process.
Thanks, Hillary. We don't have any questions yet, but I will certainly flag them if anything comes through.
Great, thank you. All right. So here's some information of how you can contact your legislator and when you want to, let's say, have a meeting with a legislator, or you're wanting to reach out about a particular bill. Sometimes people can't make it to a hearing, or they can't even offer virtual testimony. So a lot of times people will reach out to their legislator and just weigh in via email. Legislators pay attention to their emails and to see if they get emails from constituents about bills that are moving through the legislature. And so you can go to legislature.idaho.gov. That is where you'll find all of this information. And you can go and click on Find My Legislator and type in your address, and it'll bring up your district. Once you have found your legislator, they have all their contact information of how you can get a hold of them. So here's an example. You can contact Representative Necochea if you're in District 19. That's for email. You can get a hold of her at home. There's like her home number, but then also her phone number while during the legislative session. So you can email her if you want to weigh in on a particular bill, or if you want to have a meeting with her, you can reach out either phone or email and say, hey, I would like to have a conversation with you about a particular topic that is happening right now. Or even if you want to bring something to a legislator's attention that maybe isn't even being paid attention to at the moment, like, hey, I want to come in and talk to you about provider reimbursement rates and what some challenges we're having right now. Or so you can bring up topics that aren't even moving through the legislature at the time.
Right, we had a question come through, Hillary. This individual stated, how long can they hold it and not vote on it, or is there a time frame?
That's a really great question. When a committee is voting on a bill, sometimes they can choose to hold it in committee. It is really up to the chairman. The chairman of committees have so much power and ability to do a lot of what they want to do. They can have bills show up to their committee, and they can choose to never even give that bill a hearing. We've had committee chairmen hold bills in their desk and refuse to give it votes. Sometimes it can go both ways. It can be a positive thing, it can be a negative thing. Sometimes there's been some pretty terrible legislation come through that lawmakers have been like, no, I don't even want to entertain this as an opportunity to vote on. I don't care if the House voted on it in the Senate committee. This is not an idea we're going to entertain. A committee may hear a bill and go through the testimony and not get through all the testimony and decide, well, you know what, I don't think we're ready to vote on this bill right now, so we're going to hold it for until a time certain. And the chairman can choose and ask the committee to hold the bill. And but the committee has to vote whether or not to hold it after it's already gone through the process of actually getting testimony. And then it's really up to the chairman to decide when that actually is brought back up again. And so the chairman can choose to hold a bill indefinitely, and the committee can also vote to hold the bill. The committee, I've even seen before where a chairman will hold the bill and then not even want to give it another opportunity to be heard. And I've seen legislators actually ask for a committee vote to bring a bill back up for consideration. And if that's brought up, they can actually vote on it and whether the chairman does or does not want to hear it. If the committee votes to bring it back up, they have to. So Let me know if you have any clarifying questions or if you want me to rephrase anything or state anything again. All right, I'll just go ahead and keep going unless any other questions pop up. So meeting with legislators. Like I had mentioned, you can meet with your legislator by contacting them. You can meet them in person or via phone call. You can also ask to set up a Zoom meeting and meet virtually. Usually legislators are so busy during session, and once they, I would say, start getting into February, they start getting super busy. So it's really challenging to sometimes nail down times for a very long meeting. So usually plan for 10 or 15 minutes. That's about how much time they'll probably give you. A lot of times it's really helpful to have a 30-second elevator pitch to just go through why you're there, what you want to talk to them about, and making sure that you have your top line points in that 30-second pitch. Because sometimes after you get talking to a legislator, sometimes they can go off on tangents or get away from the conversation. So it's really important to have your 30-second elevator pitch ready and to go at the beginning of your meeting. So it's really important to treat it just like a professional meeting. Even if sometimes you're going to disagree with your legislator. And that's okay. That is an opportunity to clarify your points or ask them for insight of where they're at, or emphasize the importance of why you're there. It's really important to build that rapport with legislators, even if you don't agree, so that they will continue wanting to talk to you in the future about other things, whether you agree or not. It's always really important to thank them for the time that they give, and also to offer to follow up with them with resources or answer questions that maybe you weren't able to answer during the meeting. A lot of times legislators will throw out oddball questions, and it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to not have answers to questions that they have, but it's always a great opportunity to just say, you know what, I don't have the answer for that right now, but let me get that for you. And then it provides an opportunity to follow up with them in the future, to answer more questions, make sure that they have all the information they need to make informed decisions about the issue you're talking about. Okay. Any other questions pop up? Otherwise, I'll just keep going.
Yeah, we had one question that relates to what you just covered, and another question that I believe will tie into your next section. The first one is, so one person can decide what is important enough to be discussed?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The chairman, leadership, they all tend to have a lot of power in the legislature. And so, yes, technically one person can have a lot of power over the fate of a bill. We've had chairmen in the past say, I don't want to listen to a bill. I don't want to hold a hearing on it. I'm going to hold on to it. And we get word that they're holding on to important bills. And so a lot of times we've seen people call the chairman and ask the chairman to hold a hearing. And sometimes if they get enough phone calls from people saying, hey, this is actually really important to have a hearing on, to have a vote, like, will you please hear this bill? A lot of times that can be really successful, and in having the chairman actually decide to hold a hearing on the bill. But sometimes if they're like, I don't really want to listen to this, and I'm not hearing from any of my constituents or from people that this is something that is important to have a hearing on, and so can choose to just hold on to it, basically because they're not hearing from anybody about it.
Thank you. And then another one just came through related to what you just covered. Can you lobby with the chairman?
Can you lobby with the chairman? Was that the question? Yes, absolutely, because the chairman still holds one of the votes. So the chairman always gets a chance to vote. And so, yes, absolutely. Meeting with the chairman can be really powerful. A lot of times we meet with chairmen quite frequently on different bills. A lot of times we'll ask them to not have a hearing on a bill. We'll a lot of times ask them to support a bill. So yes, you can lobby chairmen just like you do other legislators.
Okay, last one for now. I saw much needed increases in reimbursement rates for therapy and other series, but nothing for support services such as peer support. Is that decided by the legislature or decided more internally by associated agencies?
That's a great question. And I'll dig a little bit more into provider reimbursement rates too here in a minute, but essentially right now, so for example, the Medicaid budget is drafted by Health and Welfare. They put together their budget recommendation and request, and they can choose to ask the legislature to do provider rate reimbursement increases. They can also they can include all of those asks, but ultimately it is up to the legislature whether or not to grant that. So there will be two different budgets that you'll see come through to the legislature from Medicaid, from like Health and Welfare Department, and from the governor. So you'll have the state agency will put out their request and say, hey, this is what we need, and this is what we're asking for. And then the governor will come in with his recommendation and say, I agree, or you know what, I actually think that these pieces of the budget are unnecessary, or I actually think that there needs to be more. And so he can choose to come in with his recommendation and say, I actually think that the legislature should do even more provider rate reimbursement increases than Health and Welfare is asking for. Or he can come in and say the opposite, like they're asking for a lot. I don't think it's a good idea to approve this big of a budget. I am not going to recommend that. In the end, the legislature, so the particularly the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee, who hears those budgets, they will get a presentation from Department of Health and Welfare. They'll get a presentation from the governor's office on both sets of recommendations. But then they will be the ones to decide what they want to approve. They can choose to go with Health and Welfare's recommendation. They can go with the governor's. They can choose to do their own thing altogether. And so, but when it comes down to it, yes, the legislature is the one who decides it. But the funny thing is it'll make its way through the legislature to get votes across the committee, House, Senate floor, and then ultimately does go to the governor for signing. And so basically what you can see is the governor can choose to veto legislation. He has to do it within 5 days of receiving a bill that has passed through the legislature, or he can choose to let it become a law without actually signing it. But after 5 days of no action, it becomes an automatic law. So that's kind of the process of how a budget makes it through and how something like a provider rate reimbursement increase actually gets approved.
Thanks, Hillarie. And just in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and let you get through the rest of the material, and then we'll address any other questions that come through at the end.
Sounds good. I think we're actually right on track for time, so we should have plenty of time at the end to answer questions. So let's talk a little bit about what we see coming up in the next legislative session, some context around what the landscape is in Idaho right now around behavioral health and mental health. I mean, it's no secret that mental health needs in Idaho are really high and are growing. About 1 in 4 Idahoans are impacted by having a mental or behavioral health condition, and it ranges across the board from depression, anxiety to severe mental illness. And we actually have the highest rate in the entire country. About 70,000 Idahoans had a serious mental illness diagnosis in 2019. A lot of people under Medicaid expansion were considered to have had some form of SMI issue, or whether diagnosed or not. Data has shown that actually over half of Idahoans actually receive no mental health treatment, and we rank 48 out of 50 in relation to providing access to mental health services. In addition, all of Idaho is considered to be in a mental health care provider shortage, which kind of paints a bleak picture for Idaho in relation to the ability to address the mental health needs in the state. Some of the issues directly to kids that we're seeing, so in 2020, about 1 in 5 teens was diagnosed with depression, which was the second highest rate in the entire country. That same year, 55% of those kids received no mental health treatment. And in 2021, it actually went even higher. It was about 60% of children and youth didn't receive any mental health treatment. Prior to the pandemic, about 24,000 kids in Idaho were uninsured. We're actually seeing that number increase where it looks like we're closer to about 35,000 children are uninsured in the state. We're also seeing increases in maternal postpartum depression. We are higher than the national average right now. We have 22% compared to 15% nationally. So all of these things really underscore just like an environment in Idaho that makes it really challenging to actually receive mental health services that people need. So how does the legislature play into the behavioral health care system? So like I mentioned earlier, because we set budgets for programs like Medicaid, that program serves 420,000 people in the state, and which is a significant portion of individuals who need mental and behavioral health services. The legislature also passes policies that instruct health and welfare and public health programs and behavioral health programs on ways to strengthen or implement new versions of programs. There's a couple of different processes, and Medicaid through waiver programs to increase access to different services. So like home and community-based services is an example. This last legislative session, the legislature and the governor really infused a lot of new funding into the system to enhance behavioral health supports in the state. So with recent federal legislation that has gone through called the American Rescue Plan Act last year, it really opened up so many opportunities for states to take advantage of funding to address needs in the community as a result of COVID, and a lot of it being around mental and behavioral health. So the Idaho Behavioral Health Council went through all the different opportunities for grants and funding. It looked at opportunities to increase funding for different programs. And last year alone, they invested about $60 million into the behavioral health system. So an example of that was the implementation of 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline. They also included funding for grants to go to community behavioral health clinics, recovery centers, substance use treatment, diversion programs, and also included about $15 million to start 3 new psychiatric treatment centers. So for this upcoming legislative session, some of the top items that we see as being on the legislature's mind, definitely going to be the Medicaid budget. This is one of the largest behavioral health, it funds a lot of behavioral health programs. So Medicaid budget is a key part of that. Also, topics of conversation we're hearing quite a bit is workforce, a lack of providers, challenges for the workforce such as provider reimbursement rates, housing, childcare, issues that are impacting everybody, but it especially impacts healthcare providers in the behavioral health space. Because of a lack of providers, long wait times in certain parts of the state. I know some of our urban areas are not as bad, but some rural areas where services are already limited, wait times we're seeing are even longer. And then in addition, we're likely to see a lot more conversation about in furthering the Idaho Behavioral Health Council strategic plan, because they did lay out like a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, and looking at where they're at in those in that plan and what additional investments they need to build on from last session and continue through the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And then we also think that see that the legislature really looking at and paying attention to rising depression rates, both in youth and postpartum women in particular. So these are the key topics that we definitely see coming up this upcoming legislative session. I'll stop there and see if there are other questions.
Thanks, Hillarie. So it doesn't look like a question came through, but a comment. The individual states, it would be great if those voting on budgets could have actual experience with mental health situations or child protection.
Yes, absolutely. And that is where I think everybody comes into play. That's where the public comes into play. The legislature, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the legislature is a part-time legislature. These are people in our community who have chosen to serve in the legislature. They make, because they're a part-time legislature, they only make about $20,000 a year for their time that they spend in the legislature. They also are a lot of people who are like, they're farmers, they're local community members. They have ranches, or they're teachers, educators, retired folks who have the time to serve. They don't have the time to become experts in every single area that they're tasked with setting laws on. And so that's where all of us come in to play, and why it's so important for public involvement and professionals who have experience in these areas, particularly behavioral health, to come in and raise what are the challenges, to talk about what is needed to better the system for families, kids, and individuals with behavioral health needs. And that's why everybody here who's on this call right now in this webinar is the role that you all play in being able to help bring these up with legislators is so important. And so I hope that if you get anything out of this today, is that your voice matters and your voice is important, and legislators do want to hear from you. So please take the time to reach out to your legislator, have a meeting with them before session, talk to them during session, email them, call them, to develop that relationship and show them the expert that you are in your area, and because your voice really does matter.
Okay, a couple other questions came through. I know Idaho voted for Medicaid expansion. Have we seen that fully implemented?
Ooh, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yes. So in 2018, Medicaid expansion passed at the ballot with 61% of the vote, which was super exciting. They implemented it, and people were able to start accessing the program January of 2020. We now have about 127,000 individuals covered on Medicaid expansion, which is incredible. We've seen about $100 million saved in state general funds by being able to cover people through Medicaid expansion, which we've seen so many people access behavioral health services. So yes, to the long answer here is it is fully implemented. People can apply for the program and see if they qualify. So definitely encourage people to apply to see if they actually qualify for the program.
Thank you. And are there more federal funds available for the legislature's approval that are open to mental and behavioral health spending?
Yes. So there are a lot of available grants and untapped dollars that can still be pulled down through like the American Rescue Plan Act, in addition to some federal funding through Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program to help increase access. So there are, I know that we're actually going through and evaluating what all other grants haven't been pulled down through the ARPA funds yet. But so yes, there are, but it's kind of nuanced in where all those dollars come from.
Thank you. I also want to know if there is any legislation that addresses support for refugees in particular.
You know, that it is not my area of expertise on legislation for refugees, to be honest. I have not heard of anything coming up yet. I know that there was legislation last legislative session, but it was not, I would not consider it good legislation. As far as legislation for support of refugees, there is none that I know of.
Great, thank you. And we're all good for now, it looks like.
All right, perfect. Well, we are just right on time. I want to go through just super quickly. We really are here at, through Idaho Kids Covered to be a resource for you on how to be involved in the legislature. We are always reaching out to our network to give updates on opportunities to be involved in the program, in our network, be involved in the legislature. We send out opportunities to come testify, to reach out to legislators. So we do action alerts. We do monthly webinars. And we also are sending out all of our most recent reports on everything healthcare policy related that we work on. So I definitely encourage you, if you want to stay involved, please subscribe to our network. It's just idahokidscovered.org. We are on all social media platforms, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can also, if you want to talk more offline and talk with me individually about some of your experiences, there's my contact information. You can call or text me, you can email me. We're always looking to talk to people about their experiences and their stories, particularly people who have Medicaid. We actually have a program right now where for people to share their Medicaid stories and experiences, and they get a gift card for being involved. So if that's something that you're interested in or think somebody might be interested in, please send them over my way. We also have a share your story form on our website, so you can go and fill that out online. But yeah, just really want to encourage all of you to stay in touch, be involved, and subscribe to our networks, and happy to chat and answer more questions if you have them.
Thanks, Hillarie. Had another one come through. Provider reimbursement rate is important to me as my developmental adult kids struggle with services due to provider staffing. What would be parts of my story that would help advocate for that need? The DD waiver is not attached to the expanded, excuse me, the DD waiver is not attached to the expanded Medicaid.
Yes, that's a great question. So you're correct. DD waivers is not a part of Medicaid expansion. However, I know a lot of legislators have heard quite a bit from folks who have a need for increased provider rates when it comes to the DD waiver. So the part of your story, like sharing the challenges in from low reimbursement rates and the challenges that provides for family, for workforce, is super valuable. So sharing that perspective of what maybe some of the opportunities that would be possible if those were increased is always super helpful. So yes, I would highly, highly encourage reaching out and either talking to us or contacting your legislature to talk about the challenges that those low reimbursement rates actually are causing.
Thank you. Looks like that's, excuse me, y'all, I woke up with a not so happy throat. It looks like that's everything that we have in the questions box. Of course, as you all saw, Hillarie provided her contact information. If you have additional questions that come up, please feel free to contact her. And again, the slides are available under the handouts tab for you to download, and they will also be uploaded to the Empower Idaho website. We'll go ahead and end the session now, and I hope to see the rest of you at our noon session on ethics. So thank you.